The school bus was careening toward the cliff's edge, its brakes completely failed, when something impossible appeared in the rearview mirror. Maya, a 6-ton circus elephant who had escaped just hours earlier, was charging down the mountain road behind them. The children inside had no idea that their lives were about to be saved by the most unlikely hero imaginable. Copper Mountain Road wound through the Sierra Nevada like a serpent, its hairpin turns and steep gradients making it one of the most treacherous routes in Northern California. The road had been carved into the mountainside decades earlier, when engineers prioritized the shortest distance between the valley towns rather than the safest passage. Now, at 3:47 p.m. on a crisp October afternoon, that decision was about to become a matter of life and death for 28 elementary school children. Sarah Mitchell had been driving school buses for 12 years, navigating these mountain roads with the careful precision of someone who understood that she carried the most precious cargo imaginable. At 42, she was known throughout the Copper Valley School District for her impeccable safety record and her ability to keep even the most rambunctious children calm during the hour-long ride from Mountain View Elementary to the various rural communities scattered throughout the region. Not today's passengers were particularly excited. They were returning from a field trip to the Natural History Museum in the valley, their backpacks stuffed with souvenir postcards and their heads full of stories about dinosaurs and ancient civilizations. The energy level in the bus was higher than usual, with children chattering about their favorite exhibits and trading the small fossil replicas they'd purchased in the gift shop. "Mrs. Mitchell, can we see the elephants at the zoo next time?" called out Emma, a precocious 8-year-old from the third row. The question sparked a chorus of enthusiasm from her classmates, all of whom began sharing their own animal preferences for future field trips. Sarah smiled in her rearview mirror, enjoying the children's enthusiasm even as she maintained her focus on the winding road ahead. "We'll see what we can arrange," she called back. "But right now, I need everyone to stay in their seats. This next stretch is pretty curvy." What Sarah didn't know was that just 15 miles ahead, another story was unfolding that would intersect with theirs in the most extraordinary way imaginable. Maya was a 6-ton African elephant who had spent the last 15 years as the star attraction of Romano's traveling circus. Born in captivity in a breeding facility in Texas, she had known no other life than the carefully choreographed world of circus performance. Her days were structured around feeding times, training sessions, and twice-daily shows where she would perform an elaborate routine of tricks that delighted audiences but left her increasingly frustrated and restless. Maya was unusually intelligent, even by elephant standards. She had mastered complex commands, could paint pictures with a brush held in her trunk, and had even learned to respond to simple mathematical problems by touching numbered cards with her foot. But intelligence without freedom had become a burden. And in recent months, her trainers had noticed signs of the psychological stress that often affected captive elephants: repetitive swaying, loss of appetite, and an increasing reluctance to perform. On this particular morning, Romano's circus was traveling between performance venues, making the journey from Sacramento to Reno in a convoy of trucks and trailers. Maya rode in a specially designed transport vehicle, a massive semi-trailer that had been modified to accommodate her size and provide adequate ventilation. The vehicle was driven by Tony Moretti, a veteran circus employee who had been transporting animals for over 20 years. Tony had always prided himself on his safety record, but today's journey was proving more challenging than usual. A late-season storm had moved through the mountains overnight, leaving the roads wet and treacherous. As the convoy climbed toward the Copper Mountain Pass, Tony found himself fighting to maintain control of the heavy vehicle on the slick pavement. Maya sensed the danger before any of the humans did. Her acute hearing picked up the subtle changes in the truck's engine rhythm, the slight variations in the road noise that indicated they were losing traction. She began shifting her weight, trying to communicate her distress to Tony through the movements that experienced handlers would recognize as warning signals, but Tony was too focused on the immediate challenge of navigating the treacherous road to notice Maya's behavior. When the truck hit a patch of black ice on a particularly sharp curve, events unfolded with devastating speed. The trailer began to slide sideways, its momentum carrying it toward the guardrail that was the only barrier between the road and a 200-foot drop into the canyon below. Tony fought desperately to regain control, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he applied every technique he'd learned in decades of driving. For a moment, it seemed he might succeed. The truck straightened slightly, and the skid appeared to be slowing. But then the front wheels caught in a pothole filled with standing water, and the vehicle lurched violently to the right, the impact with the guardrail was thunderous, sending sparks flying as metal scraped against metal. The guardrail held, but barely, and the force of the collision caused the trailer's rear door mechanism to fail. The heavy steel doors swung open with a crash that echoed across the mountainside of Mia, who had been bracing herself against the trailer walls during the skid, suddenly found herself facing an opening to the outside world. For 15 years, she had dreamed of such a moment, but now that it was here, her first instinct was not to escape but to check on Tony's condition. The truck driver was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious from the impact, but breathing steadily. Maya's intelligence allowed her to assess the situation quickly. Tony was hurt but not critically injured, and help would surely arrive soon. The damaged truck was blocking part of the roadway, making it impossible for other vehicles to pass safely, but Maya's acute senses detected something else that the humans would have missed: the scent of automotive brake fluid mixing with the mountain air. Somewhere nearby, another vehicle was in serious mechanical trouble. Her maternal instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution and never fully suppressed despite her years in captivity, told her that young lives were in danger. Maya made a decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone who believed that circus animals were merely trained performers incapable of independent thought. She carefully climbed down from the damaged trailer, her massive form moving with surprising grace despite the steep terrain. Once on the road, she paused to trumpet loudly, a sound that carried for miles across the mountain valleys, alerting any potential rescuers to the location of the accident. Then she began to run. Maya's pace was deceptively fast for such a large animal. African elephants can reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour when necessary, and Maya was driven by an urgency that transcended her circus training. She followed the mountain road as it curved away from the accident site, her trunk sampling the air for the increasingly strong scent of brake fluid and overheated metal. Meanwhile, 3 miles down the mountain, Sarah Mitchell was beginning to realize that something was seriously wrong with her school bus. The first sign had been a subtle change in the way the brake pedal felt under her foot, a sponginess that hadn't been there during the morning drive to the museum. She had initially attributed it to the cooler mountain air affecting the hydraulic system, but as she pressed the brakes for a routine curve, the pedal went all the way to the floor with no response. Sarah's 12 years of experience kicked in immediately. She downshifted to a lower gear, hoping the engine compression would help slow the massive vehicle. She also began looking for potential escape routes, wide spots in the road where she might be able to steer the bus safely off the pavement, or up hillside roads that could serve as runaway truck ramps. But Copper Mountain Road offered few such options. The route had been engineered for efficiency, not emergency situations, and most of the curves were flanked by either steep drop-offs or solid rock walls. Sarah realized with growing horror that her options were rapidly diminishing. "Kids, I need everyone to put on their seatbelts right now," she called out, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear growing in her chest. "We're going to play a safety game, and I need you all to buckle up and hold on tight." The children, sensing the change in Sarah's tone, quickly complied. Emma, the 8-year-old who had asked about visiting the zoo, helped some of the younger children with their seatbelts while keeping her eyes fixed on Sarah's face in the rearview mirror. Sarah continued to work through her options as the bus gained speed on the downhill grade. She tried the emergency brake, but it provided only minimal resistance, not nearly enough to stop a vehicle of this size and weight. The engine compression was helping, but not enough to prevent their speed from gradually increasing. That's when she saw the warning sign that made her blood run cold: steep grade, trucks use lower gear, runaway vehicle ramp 2 miles. 2 miles. At their current rate of acceleration, they would reach that ramp in less than 90 seconds, if they could make it around the 3 sharp curves that lay between their present position and the emergency escape route. The first curve approached with terrifying speed. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tightly, using every ounce of her skill to navigate the turn safely. The bus's tires squealed against the pavement, but they held their grip. Behind her, she could hear some of the children crying softly, though most remained remarkably calm. "Everyone's doing great," Sarah called out, trying to project confidence. She didn't feel. "Just hold on tight and we'll be fine." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah could see the second curve approaching, and she knew this one would be much more dangerous. The road surface appeared to be wet from the morning's storm, and the curve was sharper than the first. At their current speed, there was a very real possibility that they wouldn't make it around. That's when Maya appeared in the rearview mirror. At first, Sarah thought she was hallucinating from stress. The sight of a massive elephant charging down the mountain road behind a school bus was so surreal, so impossible, that her mind initially rejected what her eyes were seeing. But as Maya drew closer, there was no denying the reality of the situation. Maya was running with a purpose that was unmistakable to anyone who understood animal behavior. This wasn't the random flight of an escaped circus animal, this was a deliberate response to a perceived threat. Maya had somehow identified the school bus as being in danger, and she was positioning herself to help. The elephant's intelligence became apparent as she approached the rear of the bus. Rather than simply following behind, Maya moved to the left side of the road, running parallel to the bus at a distance that would allow her to intervene if necessary. Her massive trunk was extended forward, and Sarah could see that she was constantly sampling the air, gathering information about the bus's mechanical condition. "Mrs. Mitchell, there's an elephant behind us," Emma called out, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "I see her, honey," Sarah replied, her mind racing as she tried to process this unprecedented situation. "Everyone stay calm and keep your seatbelts on." The second curve was now only seconds away, and Sarah could feel the bus beginning to slide as she attempted to navigate the turn. The wet pavement provided less traction than she needed, and she realized with mounting panic that they were going to overshoot the curve and crash through the guardrail. That's when Maya made her move. The elephant accelerated past the bus and positioned herself on the inside of the curve, directly in the path where the bus would travel if it continued on its current trajectory. Maya's positioning was so precise, so calculated, that it could only have been the result of intelligence and spatial reasoning that few humans would have been capable of under such circumstances. The bus began to slide toward the outside of the curve. Maya used her massive body as a buffer, allowing the vehicle to make contact with her side rather than plowing through the guardrail. The impact was tremendous. Maya staggered under the force, and the bus's trajectory was altered just enough to keep it on the roadway, but Maya's intervention came at a cost. The collision had left her with several cuts and bruises, and she was now limping slightly as she attempted to keep pace with the still accelerating bus. Sarah could see the elephant's pain in her rearview mirror, but Maya showed no signs of abandoning her protective mission. The third and final curve was the most dangerous of all, a sharp hairpin turn that had been the site of several fatal accidents over the years. At the bus's current speed, there was virtually no chance of navigating it successfully. Sarah began to prepare herself and the children for the possibility that this might be where their journey ended, but Maya had other plans. The elephant had apparently assessed the geometry of the upcoming curve and realized that her previous tactic wouldn't work. Instead, she accelerated past the bus once again and positioned herself at the apex of the turn, where she began using her trunk to push against large rocks and debris on the shoulder of the road. Maya's actions were creating a makeshift barrier that would help prevent the bus from overshooting the curve. But more importantly, she was positioning herself to make one final, desperate attempt to stop the runaway vehicle. As the bus approached the hairpin turn, Maya planted her feet firmly on the asphalt and extended her trunk directly into the path of the vehicle. The impact was tremendous. Maya's trunk made contact with the front of the bus, and for a moment it seemed that she might be crushed under the massive weight, but Maya had calculated the physics of the situation with remarkable precision. Her intervention didn't stop the bus immediately, but it slowed it just enough to allow Sarah to navigate the turn successfully. The combination of Maya's intervention, Sarah's skill, and a small amount of good fortune allowed the bus to make it around the hairpin curve and begin the final descent toward the runaway vehicle ramp. Maya staggered after the impact, clearly injured but still determined to see the crisis through to its conclusion. She followed the bus as it coasted down the final straight section of road, ready to intervene again if necessary, but her heroic efforts had been enough. The bus reached the runaway ramp with just enough momentum to climb the upward sloping gravel surface before finally coming to a stop in the sand-filled catch basin at the end of the emergency route. For several seconds, the mountain was silent except for the sound of settling gravel and the distant cries of birds. Then the children began to cheer, their voices mixing with Sarah's tears of relief as she realized that they had all survived what should have been an unsurvivable accident. Maya approached the stopped bus slowly, her injuries making movement difficult, but her concern for the children still evident. Sarah opened the door and stepped outside, approaching the magnificent elephant with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, reaching out to gently touch Maya's trunk. "You saved us all." Maya's response was a gentle rumbling sound that elephant experts would later identify as a vocalization of contentment and relief. She had accomplished what her instincts had demanded. She had protected the young ones from danger, within minutes. The mountain was filled with the sounds of approaching sirens. The first responders who arrived at the scene found an almost surreal tableau: a school bus full of unharmed children, a grateful driver, and a circus elephant who had somehow appointed herself their guardian angel. The rescue operation that followed was unlike anything the emergency personnel had ever encountered. Maya's injuries required immediate veterinary attention, but she refused to leave the vicinity of the school bus until she was satisfied that all the children were safe. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the veterinarian who was called to treat Maya's wounds, was amazed by the elephant's behavior. "She's clearly in pain," Dr. Chen explained to the gathered crowd of parents, reporters, and curious onlookers. "But she won't let us transport her until she's seen every child safely reunited with their families. It's extraordinary maternal behavior. She's adopted these children as her own." The story of Maya's heroic rescue spread rapidly through social media and news outlets. Within hours, the elephant had become an international sensation, her story touching hearts around the world. But for the children she had saved, Maya was more than just a news story. She was the living embodiment of courage and selflessness. Romano's Circus, faced with an unprecedented public relations situation, initially demanded Maya's immediate return. But the outpouring of public support for the elephant, combined with the intervention of animal rights organizations and legal advocates, created a situation that required careful consideration. Emma, the 8-year-old who had asked about visiting elephants just hours before Maya saved her life, became an unexpected spokesperson for the campaign to ensure Maya's future well-being. In a video that went viral within days of the rescue, Emma stood beside Maya and spoke directly to the camera. "Maya saved all of us when she didn't have to," Emma said, her small hand resting on the elephant's trunk. "Now we need to save her by making sure she gets to live somewhere safe and happy." The legal battle over Maya's future lasted several months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Public opinion had firmly sided with the elephant, and a coalition of wildlife sanctuaries, legal organizations, and wealthy donors came together to purchase Maya's freedom and provide for her long-term care. Maya was eventually relocated to the Northern California Elephant Sanctuary, a 2,000-acre facility designed specifically to provide a retirement home for former circus and zoo elephants. The sanctuary's naturalistic environment allowed Maya to experience many of the behaviors and social interactions that had been impossible during her years in captivity. But Maya's story didn't end with her rescue and relocation. Her actions on Copper Mountain Road had sparked a broader conversation about the intelligence and emotional capacity of elephants, leading to significant changes in how these magnificent animals were treated in captivity. Sarah Mitchell returned to driving school buses. But she never forgot the debt she owed to Maya. She became an advocate for elephant welfare and frequently spoke about her experience to children and adults who were interested in learning about animal intelligence and compassion. The children who were on the bus that day maintained a special relationship with Maya, visiting her regularly at the sanctuary and participating in educational programs about elephant conservation. Emma, now a teenager, has declared her intention to become a veterinarian specializing in elephant care. Maya's story became a catalyst for legislative changes that improved the standards of care for circus animals throughout the country. Her intelligence and heroism had demonstrated that these animals were far more than mere entertainers. They were sentient beings capable of extraordinary acts of compassion and courage. Dr. Chen, the veterinarian who treated Maya's injuries, continued to study the elephant's behavior and cognitive abilities. Her research contributed to a growing body of scientific evidence supporting the view that elephants possess emotional and intellectual capacities that rival those of primates and dolphins. Maya's actions that day weren't just instinctive, Dr. Chan explained in a research paper that was later published in a leading animal behavior journal. They demonstrated problem-solving skills, spatial reasoning, and empathetic responses that indicate a level of consciousness that we're only beginning to understand. Today, Maya continues to thrive at the Northern California Elephant Sanctuary, where she has formed close bonds with other rescued elephants and serves as an ambassador for her species. Visitors to the sanctuary often remark on her calm, intelligent demeanor and the way she seems to remember and appreciate the humans who visit her. The children she saved continue to visit her regularly, their bond with Maya serving as a powerful reminder that heroism can come from the most unexpected sources. Maya's story has inspired countless people to reconsider their relationship with the natural world and to recognize the extraordinary intelligence and emotional depth of the animals with whom we share our planet. For Maya herself, life at the sanctuary represents a kind of freedom she had never known before. She spends her days exploring the vast enclosures, socializing with other elephants, and participating in enrichment activities designed to stimulate her considerable intelligence, but perhaps most importantly, Maya's legacy lives on in the memories of 28 children who learned firsthand that courage, compassion, and heroism are not uniquely human traits. Her willingness to risk her own safety to protect others serves as an enduring example of the bonds that can exist between humans and animals when both species are allowed to express their true nature. Maya's story reminds us that intelligence and compassion are not limited by species boundaries, and that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism come from those we least expect. In saving a bus full of children, Maya not only preserved 28 young lives but also opened our eyes to the remarkable capacities of her species and the urgent need to protect and respect the magnificent creatures with whom we share our world.